is the 279th meeting of the New York Comics and Picture Story Symposium. We're online for the fall. I'm Ben Katcher, the cartoonist, and our guest tonight is Jenny Goldstick. She's a Brooklyn-based artist, narrative and infographics designer, and an educator. She's exhibited at video game art gallery Babycastles, at the Wordplay Interactive Fiction Festival in Toronto, and was an official nominee at the IndieCade Independent Games Festival in 2016. She is co-creator and an executive producer of Story O workshop, an annual interdisciplinary hackathon-style event that prioritizes visual story concept over technique and media for a week-long prototyping session. She has consulted with and created graphics for a wide range of clients, including science textbook publishers, Major League Baseball, the Environmental Defense Fund, and the Office of the Mayor of New York. She went to school, a BFA at the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis, and did an MFA in Visual Narrative at the School of Visual Arts. And here, so I'll turn it over to Jenny.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Okay, so hello everybody and welcome. I'll just dive right in. My talk today will be about how data points are story points. I'll talk about my experiences in information design as well as visual storytelling fields. And then I hope to impart my own interests in the expansive, influential nature of infographic frameworks on other storytelling media. So, Ben, thank you for the lovely introduction. I'll just tell you a few other little things about myself. I consider myself to be an information designer. I'm from Chicago and I currently live in Brooklyn, and I'm giving this talk from the Palm Desert today. I'm also a visual storytelling experimentalist, and I've dabbled in comics. I make other little toys and trinkets, illustration. I've even dabbled a little bit in directing and performance. I'm an educator, workshop facilitator, and event host. I'm also a cat lover, and I'm an extremely logical thinker, which will become relevant throughout my talk. Well, the logical thinking part, not the cat loving part. But the cat up there is my boyfriend's cat, and I think she's adorable and deserves to be prominently displayed in the presentation. So here she is. Oh, and also I realized that some of you may have seen me around like in the comic scene and not known my connection to comics. Firstly, I'm in love with the form. I wasn't really introduced until college when a teacher brought Jimmy Corrigan's Smartest Kid on Earth into class, and something clicked for me. As I mentioned, I've also dabbled in comics and produced some comics adjacent work. And I've also just been lucky enough to be taught by many cartoonists and illustrators over the years. Ben mentioned like you don't have to make your talk about comics or explain why you're connected to comics or anything, but I don't know, I feel so grateful to have any sort of connection to the comics community, and I'm always honored to be in the presence of cartoonists. So thank you for having me. So I'm going to walk you through some of my own work today and some work that I feel inspired by, but it's all encapsulated in this main idea that I would like to convey to you, which is that infographic frameworks offer tools to expand upon traditional visual narratives, mostly into nonlinear storytelling, but also into interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary work as well, and in creative collaboration. The ideas about how my infographic background could be used in more artistic and narrative ways has gripped me. And so I hope to impart this exciting infographic magic onto you at least in some capacity, and who knows, maybe it could inform or inspire something you're working on or impact the way that you approach your own storytelling practice. So out of my undergraduate education, which was in visual communications at WashU in St. Louis, I first stumbled into the world of infographics. First, I was called in by a friend and a former teacher just to illustrate some infographics, like just literally produce the pictures, the graphics. But then eventually over time, I was like consulting on the data set, and I was managing them and designing them and illustrating and art directing them from the ground up. I've worked with many clients across a wide range of industries, and I started out doing corporate infographics, which is usually just about explaining or selling a complex product to investors, and they'll give you like a list of data points. Maybe it's like marketing data or user data, someone that's used their product. And then I would need to string together those points to tell a cohesive data story. Eventually, I made my way into this type of work. I've worked in publishing, academia, for Major League Baseball, has been mentioned, and I've contributed to many science textbooks as well. So work here. This piece was completed for Alaska Communications Systems, and it demonstrates an impressive fiber optic cable that the client built. It uses the map of Alaska to the Pacific coastline, not only to emphasize the distance of the cable, but it also gives the opportunity to overlay other types of information, such as seismic activity and snowfall and avalanche conditions that presented challenge during the construction. These are two pieces completed for an essay and a book by author Matthew Gavin Frank. The essay that the image on the left is based on uses the construct of a crawfish etouffee recipe to lyrically unravel the politics, history, and struggle behind the dish. So this illustration uses a bottleneck diagram structure to reflect that, showing all of the chaos in the recipe pieces being pulled down into the plated final crawfish etouffee dish. Yum, delicious. The published version is digital and interactive, so a user can scroll over parts of the recipe to reveal parts of the author's lyrical essay. On the right, the graphics reflect the comparison of stories about the giant squid before photographic evidence that it existed, and then after, which are covered in the author's book, Preparing the Ghost. So a basic comparison there is being represented between the left and the right side of the image. It's before the photographic evidence and after. These graphic excerpts are from one of the many science textbooks that I have worked on. This one charts the path of the ship New Horizons on its mission to study Pluto, while also illustrating key facts about Pluto's scale, makeup, and orbit. These graphics show the makeup of the 25-man team rosters who play in Major League Baseball's postseason. I designed the charts so that the height of the columns represent those 25 players, and then within each team, comparisons can be made between whether players were homegrown or drafted, traded, or if they were brought onto the team as a free agent. I've done a lot of other work for Major League Baseball as well. I worked there for about 4 seasons, and you can see many different means of displaying visual information here. On the left, I chopped up a long, narrow graphic. This is a pool of facts about Japanese players in MLB. And this can be like a deceptively simple task. Once you start lining up facts together, they inevitably employ a point of view. Here in the center is a chart showing MLB teams' most common trading partners, and the width and the color of the line indicate how many trades and then also which division the team is in. The chart in the upper right-hand corner is the story of how well the Astros were doing in the 2017 season because even just 58 games in, which is marked there, they had already won 43 games, which was comparable to these other historic championship teams, which are listed here. And then lastly, here's an excerpt of a graphic showing different types of players' iconic eyewear throughout MLB history. So I'm going to describe a two-part epiphany to you today. One of which is that after I was completing these infographic projects for a few years, I became, well, first of all, I have to say maybe I became a little bored, especially when I was in the corporate infographic realm. But then when I got into more client-facing stuff, that's like that's more exciting to me. But I became very interested in the fact that, like, no matter what subject matter that I was tasked to illustrate or design around, that information was getting explained in similar ways. So I came upon that realization intuitively, but then over time I've learned more about it. So all of these various forms that I just showed you, they all utilize one of these frameworks: time, location, category, and hierarchy. And all information, all visual information is sorted this way. So time is like a timeline. Location, in simplest terms, is something that's based on a map, like the first piece that I showed you. Category means showing classifications or divisions within a system, like the glasses example that I showed you. And hierarchy asks how much in comparison to something else. It compares the importance or the ranking of a set of data. Some people also say that another way to organize visual information is alphabetically, but excuse me, I think those people are just trying to spell the acronym LATCH. I'm just telling you this because if anyone Googles this afterward, you might see alphabetical included in this pedagogical overview of visual information. We can talk about it later. I don't consider that like a useful way a useful framework necessarily. Infographics also offer many common structures, some of which have appeared in the client work that I was showing you. Venn diagrams, of course, which visually aid in the comparison of multiple things. Tree diagrams, which show how a topic branches into related topics. Pyramid diagram, which could help establish a hierarchy. And we also see a lot of central vehicles with supporting points in infographics, meaning that perhaps there is a story that shows the entire image of a product, such as a toothbrush. And then other parts of the diagram will point to specific parts of the object, such as the bristles, and say something at least somewhat related to bristles. And then all of those points somehow relate to that central vehicle and or also relate to each other. And then here's just a classic pie chart. Okay, so this is where I had my second epiphany. So after I was like so excited that like there were patterns of information in infographics, which was making my job, well, easier in certain terms, but then also just it helps free me up in other ways to be more creative. I couldn't help but think that infographic thinking must also lend itself to other types of story thinking. You know, it must be able to be applied to other things. In infographics, nonlinear storytelling is like, it's inherent to the form. As I showed you above, time is only 1/4 or debatably 1/5, depending on who you're diagramming with, of the ways that we might organize information into a visual story. So nonlinear narrative storytelling is used to convey topics that might be nonlinear storytelling in infographics is used to convey topics that might be most importantly explained on a map, if like moving between locations is particularly important in that story. Or you might end up needing to string together information that a client needs you to include for some particular reason, like they want to sell a product, for example. And then you're looking for another way to tie it together, especially if they seem non sequitur, like maybe thematically or through a central object. Or maybe you're looking for the appropriate comparison to help make everything seem relevant and coherent within an infographic. So I couldn't help but wonder then, the hows, whens, and whys of nonlinearity in visual storytelling in other visual narratives, in non-data, non-client, more artistic, and creative forms. So if in infographics use nonlinear storytelling to tie together data for the purpose of conveying a point, then other visual storytelling forms use nonlinear storytelling to do something else. So I became very interested in this framework and this way of thinking. So I'm always thinking about nonlinear stories and examples of stuff that's out there. So I thought I'd share some that I like, and that I feel inspired by, and we can take a look at them for further inspection. Leanne Shapton's book, Swimming Studies, tells the story of the author's memory of nearly making it to the Olympics in swimming. Told through a series of nonlinear autobiographical sketches and prose, the story follows the complicated feelings associated with the sport she has been so invested in from a young age. I mean, I think she went to the Olympic trials when she was a teenager. And it also encapsulates a special relationship that she has with bodies of water. She swam in pools and lakes and oceans all over the world. And it also covers her pursuit of greatness within a sport. So here's a sample from that book in which she illustrates the shapes of pools that she has swam in. And you can see here the way she visually handled that. It's monochromatic, it's very stark. She focuses on the silhouettes of the bodies of water. And to me, there's almost something scientific about it, the way that it's almost cold, the way she tries to list everything out so in such an organized fashion and lists everything out at the bottom, almost like an auction or something. I would be remiss not to mention this iconic comics example here by Richard McGuire. This book is a great example of nonlinearity in visual storytelling, as it literally jumps back and forth in time while suspending the location of the story to the corner of a single room, which is actually Richard's childhood home. I was lucky enough to work on the digital interactive version of this book for the final few months of the project. I was helping with some of the UX design and production assistants, along with Stephen Betts, the developer. You can see that Richard draws attention to the dates of the room, actively manipulating the idea of a timeline by overlaying non-sequential moments in time over each other. So another classic example of nonlinearity is in Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. The protagonist, Billy Pilgrim, returns from World War II and becomes unstuck in time and bounces from one decade to another, reliving moments of his life and unable to control where he will end up next. He also believes he was abducted by aliens at some point who I believe he thought were responsible for his ability to become unstuck from time. Maybe someone could fill me in on that. But I believe that's what happens there. And then, of course, in television, film, and other media, nonlinearity is pursued as well. So in recent Netflix history, Russian Doll is a miniseries that features a game designer, played by Natasha Lyonne, who becomes stuck in a time loop, constantly dying as she meanders through New York City on the night of her birthday party. She meets a man who's experiencing a time loop in similar circumstances. Nonlinearity is featured prominently in immersive theater and gaming too. This immersive theater experience, Sleep No More, created by British theater company Punch Drunk, is performed at the McKittrick Hotel in Chelsea, Manhattan. It is based loosely on the play Macbeth and uses location to drive the movement and pace of the experience for the audience and moves them through the story. The play takes place over 5 floors using several rooms. And I hope this doesn't ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but just to give you, illuminate it a little further how location is used. So almost like the landing page of a website, all of the characters meet together in one moment or one scene in a room, and then they disperse again So you could follow them all to this space, and when they disperse again, you could follow a different character and therefore a different set of scenes as scenes are happening simultaneously. Or you could, you know, just hang out in a room and wait for a scene to come to you. It's your choice as the audience. So based on all of these examples, plus more, I'm always consuming more nonlinear content and analyzing them and enjoying them, so feel free to share. But I feel like we can already draw some conclusions through observation. Firstly, nonlinearity seems to be a tool that it effectively helps depict memory. So in the Leanne Shapton book, for example, in swimming studies, she uses nonlinearity to show all the different facets of what almost making it to the Olympics in swimming means to her. You know, memory to me anyway, it seems like something that's dynamic. There's many memories can live within a single memory. There's many emotions associated with memory, and she does an excellent job of using nonlinearity to sort of break down the different pieces of the meaning of that experience to her. She diagrams and visualizes certain smells that evoke memories of swimming for her. And then another example that I showed you was her memory of pools of water that she swam in. So nonlinearity also evokes a temporal feeling, I find, or an emotional effect. I know that's vague, but in Richard's book here, for example, there's many like smaller narrative sequences within the larger book. So for example, there's always a woman looking for a book in 1957, and you know, there's a couple who argues in another part of the book, and there's like a Christmas family photo that's being taken every year. So there's certain things that are moving forward in time, but when they all get jumbled and put over each other, I don't know, I just feel like there's this feeling that happens of a temporal nature, like, oh, life is so fleeting, like, you know, there's like these tiny moments inside of these big moments, and I think that nonlinearity can have that effect sometimes. Also, nonlinearity is great for shifting the focus of a story from a character arc or an emotional arc, shifting focus to a character arc or an emotional arc. So in Russian Doll, for example, it looks like a story that moves in a circle because it's Groundhog Day, right? It's like every day she wakes up and it's the same, she gets rewound at the same moment at the beginning of this party. But actually, it works more like a spiral, because what's moving us forward is her emotional arc, and she needs to learn something to break the loop. So at least I have found that even when something seems totally non sequitur and non-linear, I feel like the meaning is usually brought to it through some sort of forward moving arc, but it's just an arc that's focused somewhere else, like a character or an emotion. Next, nonlinearity is good at illuminating something through comparison. So also in Russian Doll, she meets another character who's going through the same experience. He's also experiencing a time loop. So in infographics, when there's two things, they are to be compared, right? Like if I have two data points that exist next to each other, all of a sudden they become family, and now we're looking at them together, compare and contrast. So if there's two of something, they are to be compared, and I think that happens in narrative storytelling a lot too. So in that case, we could compare Natasha Lyonne's character with the other character who is experiencing the same time loop that she was. Also, I think that nonlinearity shows us something about, it's effective at conveying the trauma of war. That's why I included the Vonnegut example. There's something about, you know, showing the absurdity of it all, like, can this even be real? Like, yeah, so that's just something I've noticed as well, not just in that book, but in other war stories. So those are just some things that I have concluded. I'm happy to, I would love to hear other people's opinions on this, but this is an ongoing list, more to come. Like, I'm always thinking about this stuff, so. Okay, so nonlinear story structure has yielded interest in lots of other stuff, cross-media, interactive, and creative collaboration. The primary manifestation of this in my own experience is through hackathons and teaching. I was really into attending hackathons when I first came to New York City. A hackathon is usually a 48-hour window where teams of strangers come together to invent something. It's almost like the MTV Real World of like nerds or like of inventors. It's like, you know, 7 strangers picked to live in a house. It's like, no, it's like 7 strangers picked to be on a team and make something. And I just love them. It's a great way to meet people, and I love the feeling of a weekend-long challenge and the pursuit of making something and collaborating. So I was having so much fun doing that, and then I was also marinating on all this like story theory and nonlinear interests and content and all this stuff, that I decided to create my own hackathon, which hacks the structure of storytelling itself. So I emailed the chair of my former MFA program. I went to the MFA Visual Narrative program at School of Visual Arts. And the chair is Nathan Fox, comic artist. And he emailed me back about 15 minutes later, and he was like, totally all in. He was like, yes, let's partner on this. And he had some great ideas of his own. So it turned out to be a really good collaboration. And now we have Story Of. Story Of Workshop is a weekend-long prototyping event, and it's open to the public, all levels of experience, and it's totally interdisciplinary, and it's open to like visual designers, artists, programmers, performers, animators, any professional working in visual storytelling media. And participants work within the same set of variables and a guiding theme. And then, like storytelling scientists, they leverage those consistent variables to their own storytelling desires and ends. They also can produce the story in any media, depending on the skill sets of team members as well as what they feel is most appropriate to the story. So here are some photos of the guidebook we used in 2019 in the upper left side of the slide. And then, oh, and the theme was full circle. So you can see that somewhat reflected in that book cover. And then on the right-hand part of the slide, it's me and Nathan facilitating at launch night at the Society of Illustrators, one of our partners for the event. And then on the lower left-hand side, you can see us getting started on the first main workday of the event at School of Visual Arts, having fun. It really is fun. Like if I wasn't like producing it and hosting it and running it, I would be participating. So we give participants storytelling frameworks to guide them, and we don't necessarily dictate the structure too strongly, at least at this point. The consistent variables in 2019 were that everyone worked with the same character and the same story arc. And the way that this is produced is actually from the participants. So they fill out a questionnaire at before the beginning of the event, I think in their application. And then we curate and edit those responses into several options that everybody votes on launch night. So so in 2019, the character was a person who believes in celestial mechanics, astrology, and tarot, and thinks that they missed their chance to change everything. And the agreed upon plot was an ultra-conservative family picks up a hitchhiker, the protagonist, during a road trip that turns out to be the protagonist's worst nightmare. So those were the variables that all teams were working on, and then also there's the guiding theme of full circle. Participants are encouraged to use diagrams and Post-its and paper prototyping while they work, and mentors help them throughout the process. Here in the lower left-hand side of this slide is Aaron Edwards, a host of the excellent Pop-Up magazine. He's helping a team in that photo. On the right, I'm showing you 2 final projects from the 2019 version of the event. So on the top, we had a theatrical funerary experience. And on the bottom, we had a choose your own adventure style digital game called Unfuck Your Life. And I think that Unfuck Your Life actually won the whole thing. Although there was a close contender, which was, there was also a pitch for a Netflix show that was like a Groundhog style-esque story about how Albert Einstein wanted to prevent the drop of the bomb. which was also really good. So the parameters of this event don't necessarily yield a nonlinear outcome, but it breaks the craft of visual storytelling down into pieces in a way where we hope participants can feel liberated or empowered to shuffle them around, like puzzle pieces or like a chemical equation or something, and ultimately create their own unique content. I mean, the most rewarding part of this experience for me is just that while participants work within a seemingly rigid set of parameters, that everybody comes up with something wildly different, and it's like amazing to watch. And it all hinges on this basic equation. On launch night, we give them storytelling content and frameworks to help guide their process, and it really all hinges on this equation, which is that character plus conflict equals story. I also want to make a note that diagrammatic thinking also influences the way I teach. I started out doing the Story Of workshop, which we started doing in 2017. And stay tuned. I'm hoping that we still get to do it in 2020 in some capacity, and everyone should do it. It's so fun. But eventually I was hired on, Nathan also hired me out to his faculties. So now I'm faculty at School of Visual Arts in the MFA Visual Narrative program. And I'm not the first to be digging in the cave of nonlinearity, or the labyrinth, I guess I should say. We teach a lot to Robert McKee's story. So here I'm just showing you some examples of that. Here are some examples of frameworks, 2 frameworks that he uses in the conflict section of his book. On the left, we have 3 levels of conflict: extrapersonal, personal, and inner conflicts, which you can see is on a concentric circle. And then on the right, we have a diagram that shows progressively greater risk of jeopardy for a protagonist pursuing an object of desire. So I'm not saying that these are like meant to, again, not meant to produce nonlinearity, but there's like diagrammatic aspects of the way storytelling is taught already. Okay, so I'm going to show you some experiments in my own work. I always run little experiments and interdisciplinary projects from time to time. Some of them I sell and some of them I don't. Here's one example. This is an iterative and ongoing thaumatrope exploration, which thaumatropes were a popular toy in the 19th century. I became interested in what was like the most appropriate content or story to appear on the thaumatrope. And I ended up in a conceptual area of exploring the most appropriate modern take on this classic analog toy. Like maybe what's the most contrast I can get there, like a digital take on it, on an analog toy or something like that. So I just thought, what are the best 2 state narratives to represent that? The video on the left is what I like to call a self-aware thaumatrope, or an artificially intelligent thaumatrope, because it knows that you're spinning it. It's like watching you spin it. On the right, on the upper left of that part of the slide, it's shake a leg, because we are no stranger to the hustling lifestyle in our modern day lives. I also have the iconic low battery, something we're all familiar with. In the lower left here, I have a fidget spinner, which lives much better in concept than in actuality. I think when I make this toy, which I've tried like several times, it's weird to see the toy spin clockwise, but then you're like turning the toy back toward you and away from you. So I think it's like disorienting. But I wish it would work, And then the bottom right-hand thaumatrope here is showing static from a television. Obviously something like our modern day digital media, something we're all very familiar with. Yeah, and I'm just always iterating on this. Like I kind of want to do a set that's actually just all glitch art, like 2-state glitches on the thaumatropes. Stay tuned for that. I haven't made any progress on that one. Whoops. Okay. I'll also share with you some recent client work that is in the realm of nonlinearity. In this case, this project is Pick Your Own Path on the Oregon Trail. It's a choose your own adventure story based on the game, based on the digital game. And I was hired for a two-step task, really. Part of the task was to actually invent the branching narrative content and make the story map, which I'm showing you here. And then I had to figure out how to place it into the book. And in this particular case, the publisher was really liked Jason Shiga's Meanwhile. Maybe some people here have read it or played with it. And so they wanted to use the same mechanic. So basically the way this works is, I'm looking at the right-hand image here. So every page has multiple nodes of information. And depending on the choice you make, like that, the leader line coming from the box will lead you off the page. So if I'm looking at box B, and this is a mocked up version, by the way, not the final. It says, in the harsh conditions of a spring storm, your wagon canvas top rips apart. Do you want to try and repair it or replace it? So depending on whether you chose repair or replace, you would follow that line off the page. Here's repair. And there's no tab there, but when your finger hits the tab, it would hook you back into the book. So this was a very, challenging task. I ended up laying out the entire book in an Excel spreadsheet. So there's 10 narrative pathways available throughout the book because there were 10 tabs. So you can see all the tabs down the left-hand side of this Excel. All of the pages are along the top here. All the orange parts are the tabs. And yeah, and I just had to figure out how to lay it all in there. I mean, the main lesson of this project was like, I was looking for that silver bullet, like mathematical equation. And I just don't, at a certain point, and after consulting with a few game designer friends, I realized that there was no answer like that. I just had to iterate, and lay it into the book and figure it out. I guess one other thing I would point out about this is that the book is entirely nonlinear. You can go backward or forward, but the client wanted some pages that where a location like lived there. So Kansas River Crossing is one on spread 20 and 21. So anytime you make a choice that leads you to Kansas River Crossing, you're going to page 2021. So that was like another variable that was sort of difficult. And then at the end of the book, we decided Oregon City should go there, even though theoretically it could have gone anywhere in the book because the tabs can lead you in either direction and to any part of the book. So, and this is the final version, and it was just released in early July, for sale now from your local bookseller. Okay. So this is my memory of first heartbreak, which I can't quite piece back together, is a project I'd like to share with you as well. This was my thesis project in graduate school, but has since evolved and had several lives. The viewer of this digital point-and-click narrative experience is transported to the world of a high school romance and immersed into its Midwest suburban environment. Viewers experience the nuances of these contextual clues through a series of memory fragments as relayed to you through the eyes of the protagonist, our rememberer. From a memory of playing a game in a treehouse with friends to breaking into a public pool one summer night, the story alludes to the feeling of being young, simultaneously losing innocence and experiencing firsts, while navigating complicated feelings about what it means to love and to lose someone. The key characters are these two silhouetted figures who face each other relentlessly throughout the piece as they drift through time and space. So the way that it works is you experience a scene within this narrative experience. So like that would be like on the left, and there's limited animation and you can see the characters interacting through dialogue boxes like a comic. And they're usually like not long at all, maybe like 45 seconds or less. And then when the scene is over, it fades to grayscale, and then certain memory trigger objects are lit up. And when you click any of those objects, they connect you to a related scene. So in this case, if I clicked on the gum that's underneath the chalkboard, it would lead you to this scene where the male character tries to kiss the girl and she has gum in her mouth. So they're all connected somehow. So structurally, I explored many forms that I thought could be emotionally appropriate for the story. Much like the nonlinear influences above, I really wanted the story to represent a memory that the way that a memory should be told. So, which is to say, you know, dynamically, ever-changing, and swirling infinitely in a loop, like maybe something that you turn over and over in your head. Here are some of the structural navigations. Ultimately, the project scenes are divided into 4 levels. This is the final structure. Each click directs users to the next level until they reach the breakup scene. That is, unless they find there's one shortcut, actually. The levels make a sentence, as in level 1 and level 2, but level 3, so level 4, thus breakup. And then it loops back again to the beginning. While capturing a memory is an impossible challenge, the story attempts to simulate the feeling of how one might remember something that is particularly emotional and increasingly distant as it falls into the past. The project is event-based only, and as I said, it seems to have many lives, or many potential lives. So it has exhibited at Wordplay Interactive Fiction Festival and at Comics and Games at TCAF in Toronto. It was award nominated at IndieCade in 2016, and it was included in the Word Hack installed exhibition at Babycastles in 2017. And here also is the final navigation with screenshots from every scene. Anything you click on in any level can lead you to something else. Like, you don't have to stay on one of these thematic threads. Like there are threads, like there's like a long distance, like they broke up because of long distance. That's like one thread if you followed it linearly. But when you actually play the game, everything gets sort of scrambled. The only linear construct really is that every scene leads to sadness. So meaning like the last, like a level 4 scene is gonna be like, things are going badly. Like the breakup should come as no surprise. So most recently, I directed a live-action performance of the digital piece, which played at the Word Hack 5th year anniversary at Babycastles in 2019. I hired 2 very talented improv actors, AJ Nickel and Isra Elsa Lakia, to play the characters, and together we set scene goals that would lead them through versions of the breakup. So even in live action, the whole piece is driven by diagrams and my nonlinear passions and motives, which helped guide the flow of the piece. And also made many, like, I don't know, really cool discoveries about the differences that each media, like the effect that it might have on the audience. So what's the catch? I stand very much behind the investigation of infographic frameworks and how they apply to other visual storytelling media beyond information design. And I think I'm just sort of endlessly fascinated with the questions that it poses for visual narrative. However, I do want to point out that it's not the perfect solution or algorithm to answering your nonlinear desires and ambitions. That's mostly, I think, because diagrams and variables do not account for humanity. I once, in recent years, took a coding course at School for Poetic Computation. And the teacher, Zach Lieberman, told us that machines are really good at doing exactly what you want them to do, like over and over again. But to me, that is so distinctly machine that it could never reflect humanity. So I realized there may be no science to fully ironing out what nonlinearity means or when it's the most appropriate or the best use. Formulas can't solve everything. Like poetry, sometimes you have to go just based on a feeling. Infographic thinking can only provide frameworks, and a storyteller needs to provide the rest. So I'm going to end stemming from that. Something I often think about is whether scientific seeming story frameworks and theory actually reflect our life. Like, my dream would be to like come up with the perfect like experiential translation, like from like a nonlinearity and really get the feeling of whatever life is, or that emotional, capturing whatever that emotional thing is. So I'm going to walk you through a game called Story Theories versus Life. I'll present some formulas or some theories, and then I'll let you know my personal opinion and contemplation about whether I think that theory applies to life. Okay, So a story theory is turning points are just as good or bad as you imagine. And in storytelling, this is very, very much true. Like the worst thing that you think could happen is gonna happen. Like the very best thing may also happen. Like, you know, in a fairy tale, happily ever after is like pretty awesome, right? But in life, in actual life, things that happen are often not as impactfully good or bad as you imagine, I find, even though Twitter leads us to believe otherwise. Another story theory is tension yields character. And that's something that we hinge that entire story workshop on, and something that we teach in the context of the MFA program as well. In actual life, this is one of the few things I actually think is like 100% true. And I think that it's transitive from theory to actuality. I think in life, tension does yield character. It was hard for me not to think of like a political example for this, but I do have a spatial one. I used to live near Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, in Park Slope, Brooklyn. And I think like the pressure of and the lack of space in New York City has sort of expanded, at least my own idea, you know, and people in the area, expanded our acceptance of death. Like so many things happen at that cemetery. Like they hold these awesome, you know, musical concerts, and there's art installations, and people run through it. And I mean, I personally don't find it disrespectful or anything, but that's my example for tension yields character. Is I think that it happens spatially too, and it happens at Greenwood Cemetery and elsewhere in New York. Here's another story theory. Story yields a clear moral lesson, or at least an editorial point of view. In actual life, I think it does not, unfortunately. I think life would be a lot simpler if it did. And then lastly, a story theory is patterns exist and are predictable, which is obviously something I am a big proponent of and I believe in. I think in actual life, both story and life have patterns, but story often deals in absolutes, whereas life does not. So that's all from me. I'm just an infographic explorer out here on the frontier of story, and I hope you will all consider more diagrammatic and scientific approaches to your visual storytelling, particularly when you're dealing with the nonlinear and cross-disciplinary projects, but even otherwise too. That's all.
Thank you. Great, thank you.
Sure.
If anyone has a question, just put your name in the chat and I'll unmute you. I'd like to hear your voice. Questions? A lot of everyone's applauding.
Oh, nice.
Questions? I can start. I have a question. As an information designer, do you feel responsible for the quality of the information, or are you sort of not liable for that if you make a chart with some complete fraudulent information that someone wants to put out there?
That's a good question. I mean, to some extent, I do feel responsible, but if, you know, I don't want to say like, I mean, not to get existential, but there is no reality. Like the second you come up with an X and a Y axis, you're editorializing the data. But I will say that there are like best practices that you can put into place. Like I always try to include sources or make sources accessible within the graphics, so that if anybody is questioning like how we came up with it, you could click on one of the links that is included like in the article or at the bottom of the graphic and look into it.
So has there been a piece of infographics that you refuse to do for some reason?
Yes, once in a great while. I don't know if I should share, I guess. Yeah. If it's something I really don't believe in, like the subject matter, I might shy away, and I might tell them why, you know, too.
Okay, yeah, there's a question from Jason Little. You're unmuted.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So it's so exciting when I hear people talk about the non-linear elements of comics, because it's such a very marginalized, narrow, esoteric slice of the whole comics universe. And I think of you as very much a kindred spirit to the work that I've done and the work that I aspire to do. And so whenever I meet someone like you, I immediately want to just have a massive exchange of names of artists and works and stuff like that. But I'm kind of feeling like that'll drag, that's almost like a personal conversation. So I can just email you, I guess.
Oh, okay. Well, that's okay. I mean, if you want to ask something, I'm open to it.
Okay, so I'll just unload. Are you? So I was delighted that you mentioned Jason Shiga. And have you seen his earlier work, which is only like self-published, called Hello World?
No, I've only seen that. What's his other one about the demon?
Yes, that's more recent.
I've seen that one. Okay, that's the only one I've read. What's it called again? Hello
World.
Okay.
I'll write to you about it.
Okay, thank you.
Do you know Jesse Fuchs through Babycastles?
I know who he is, yes.
Okay, great, because he also is interested in video games and comics and nonlinearity.
Oh, cool. Okay, cool.
He teaches as an adjunct at NYU.
Oh, cool.
Do you know about the Ubapo?
Yeah, well, yes, through you guys, to be honest, like through this comics community. I came upon this stuff intuitively and I had no idea about that. And then I think somebody, maybe Ben or Bill or somebody, told me to look into it.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. I'll send you a single book recommendation, which is in French. I don't speak French, but the pictures are great.
Okay, cool. I would love that. Thank you so much.
Sure. And then finally, I put together and this is going to sound stupidly self-serving, I put together, with some collaboration of a bunch of artists, a gallery exhibit that took place in a labyrinth. And it was images hung on the wall. It was called Cartoonal.
Okay.
Did you by any chance stumble into it in 2004?
No.
Okay, I'll hook you up with it.
Is there documentation? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
there's documentation. Okay, that's it.
Oh.
Yeah,
Thank you.
The question from Bob Sikoriak. If I can unmute him.
Hi, Jenny. That was great.
Hey, Bob. Thanks.
First, I have to say, Jason, send me that list.
You see you.
Yeah.
But Jenny, I loved your talk. I thought it was really great.
Thank you.
And I I knew about some of your work, but not all of it. And of course, I was very excited about the performance that you made. I was curious if you incorporated the visuals into it. I mean, besides the actors, did you have the graphics or the diagrams to help people know what was going on, or was it more improvisational than that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I decided I was going to show a video and I decided not to. It's too like abstract. But so I did show part of the piece, but I didn't give as much context. It really informed what types of context I would need to give next time if I wanted people to understand where it was coming from. But so for that particular performance, they had like a projector behind the actors. And so we played the intro of the project and then we would cover the projector and then the actors would do their scenes and they would cue that they were going through the levels, but that was it. Like there was like a verbal cue. They'd be like, next place, like next scene, next scene, next scene. And then they would obviously break up and then they would go off stage and then the intro would play again.
Great.
Yeah, it was fun.
There's a question from Samuel Holoran. I can unmute him.
Hi, am I unmuted?
Yes.
Great. I was just wondering about how, having worked in infographics, how you balance this need to kind of boil down all the information you're given into one very concise little bit versus the kind of idea of having serendipity and play in there. So I think there's these two competing things. Like one is to deliver information as quickly and painlessly as possible, and the other is to maintain some sort of levity and fun in the visuals themselves.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think you've identified the struggle. Yeah, I mean, I think you want both of those. I had some teachers once who told me, who had worked for the New York Times graphics section, who told me that they tried to make graphics that would appeal to both the Bart and the Lisa Simpson reader. And I think about that a lot, meaning like could you simplify it enough that someone could get the main story at a glance, but then someone like maybe that's like a Bart Simpson reader, and then, you know, a Lisa Simpson reader could glean more insight if they wanted to like dive deeper and get more information. So I definitely think a lot about that. And that actually plays into one of the structures I talked about. Like, I think using a central vehicle, I mean, I know that's vague, but sometimes that can help because, you know, it's like you can either look at the literal big picture, or you can get granular and inspect, you know, other parts of this thing.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Anybody else? So here's one, hold on. Bill. The question from Bill Kotalopoulos. Oops. Sorry.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, how's it going, Jenny? One thing I wanted to ask you about, I was kind of just thinking about linear versus nonlinear as you were talking. And I also was thinking about like the examples that you were showing. And I guess one of the things that I was kind of thinking about was how you see the relationship between nonlinearity and interactivity, in the sense that, like, for example, there are like narratives that are nonlinear, but they're not like interactive, you know? So for example, like, I mean, even if you watch like Russian Doll, just, you know, or whatever, Groundhog Day or whatever, I mean, it's like, it's nonlinear in a way in its structure, but it's not interactive. Like, I can't choose what order to watch those things in. And then there's stuff like your project that you were talking about before, which is nonlinear and interactive. So I was just wondering if you could talk about those two things as related elements. I know that's very, very, very broad.
No, yeah, no, it's, I'm glad you brought that up, Bill, because there was like a whole section of this talk. It would have been like a 5-hour talk if I included like choice-based games and stuff too, but there's like a whole other thing happening in, like, you know, IF world, you know, the interactive fiction world and gaming world, and they also study their own structures. Like I was going to share this chart, maybe I'll send it to you later, but patterns in choice-based games. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a whole, yeah, I mean, that's a whole other bag of worms. But the structure of a choice-based game can also impact, you know, all kinds of things: the mood, the tone, the experience. Like, because you sort of recognize the media the type of media that you're in as you're playing it. You're like, oh, I'm in a bottleneck structure, or at least I do. But I'm like a structuralist thinker, I guess. But I'll be like, oh, I'm in a bottleneck structure. That means there's only one single path, and I know I have to get to the end. Like a recent example would be, I don't know if anybody, or if you or anyone has played the Kimmy Schmidt interactive TV show on Netflix. Okay, that one's bottleneck, because there's only one way to go. There's only one path, actually, and you might veer off the path and make a wrong choice, but they indicate that that's the wrong choice, and you're gonna have to make another choice. Like the game Life is Strange also does that. But then there's other types of choice-based games that don't work like that at all, and you know, I think those can also be leveraged as storytelling components or media, to like leverage to make it, you know, enhance a mood or a tone or the pacing.
Okay. The question from Jonathan Eugenspiel. I can unmute him.
All right, there we go. Oh yeah, I didn't change my name. Hi.
Hey.
It's me.
Hey, yeah, nice to see you.
You can kind of see me there, illuminated. I'm sorry about the squeaky chair. I'm really enjoying the giant squid graphic that you just directed us towards. Was that from a long time ago, or?
Yeah, I mean, maybe from like, not that long actually, maybe like 2015. Yeah, and thank you. Yeah, I mean, that, I wish I had more collaborations with that author. He writes diagrammatically. Like he's totally like a poet and very lyrical. If you read one of his books, you might not even recognize it as a novel because it just jumps all over, and he's very emotional. But they lend themselves very well, I think, to diagramming. So thank you.
Okay, and so that was a promotional image for the book?
Yes, it was published by W.W. Norton, and supposedly it was promoted, even though I didn't see it that many places.
All right, no, it's really cool. And I actually have another more formal question, or thought maybe. So I know we've spoken about infographics and memory and your work. And so when you mentioned the relationship between non-linearity and representations of war and trauma of war and so on, and experience of war, that made me think not simply about how the memory is experienced, but the actual formation of memory. So that when, so I was wondering if you feel about that. So if you're like in a intense experience, like in a large scale, rapid combat, as a participant, you wouldn't have necessarily have the luxury of forming your memories in a very organized, stable way. So it's actually, it seems like the actual, so not just the after the fact recollection, but in the very process of memory formation seems, for those things, seems to like sort of invite the experience of nonlinearity.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
no, that's awesome. Yeah.
So memory formation.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, no, and I also, when I did This Is My Memory of First Heartbreak, I did some research about memory, but more from the other end, from the recall side. You know, and that informed some of the structure of that piece, like the looping aspect. And I mean, in the perfect world, that piece would actually just continually change. Like if I knew more like programming, I was lucky enough to partner with Stephen Betts, who developed Richard's project, and also another friend, Owen Roberts, on that project who helped me. But in the perfect world, it would be like procedurally generated, and different aspects of the memory would like pop up every time, because the research and my own experience tells me that memory works that way, you know, where everything's always changing when you recall it, depending on like what triggered the memory, how are you feeling that day, like there's so many different factors. So yeah, that side I've done, but yeah, memory formation is also, that's super interesting. I would love to look into that.
All right, well,
Thank you.
all right, cool.
Yeah.
Anyone else? See anything else, unless I'm not somebody, if I miss somebody, put your name up again. Okay, otherwise, thank you for the fascinating talk.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And everyone's applauding silently.